So NFX has been invested in LatAm since the earliest days. And when we first looked at it, we were kind of amazed at a couple of things. So firstly, we were incredibly impressed with the talent. And I think we'd seen that perhaps historically founders had been born in other regions and then moved to the US and started US businesses and had US companies. But increasingly, they were going back to Latin America and building Latin American businesses. And so there was this hungry, talented, committed set of people that were building really, really interesting businesses. Two is that we found this country which had a lot of technology. The mobile penetration was enormous, but there weren't really that many perhaps traditional tech companies. You look at China or look at India, you look at Europe, and there's a lot of sort of traditional tech companies. Like from a sort of entrepreneur perspective, this is a massive market, but it's relatively greenfield in terms of incumbents. There's not just this sort of patchwork of companies that are there. So it's really sort of kids in a candy store, the amount of opportunity in front of them. And then three, while there are a bunch of differences, it's fairly homogenous. There's like two main languages, Spanish and Portuguese. There's similar customs. As I compare it to England, to Europe quite often, where the patchwork of countries and cultures is enormous. There's differences across Latin America, but there's generally more similarity between the size of the population. So we dived in really early on and have been incredibly impressed with the opportunities out there. The talent's incredible, the market's very, very large and growing quickly. And it's the founders that are kind of able to combine the sort of the local flavor, the local culture, the local needs with the best of what everyone's seeing around the world to create this sort of magical recipe of startups, and they're doing incredibly well. So it's a market that we're extremely excited about. So since NFX first initially invested in Latin America, we've seen the industry and the constant transform. So startup formation has been rapid. It's gone from a niche activity to kind of a mainstream activity, just like we've seen it happen in other parts of the world. We've seen venture capital coming in a big, big way. Venture capital's moved in, big funds and smaller funds, like the capital is there to really help fuel the ecosystem. And we've seen digitization happen in a way that's impacting every industry. So COVID has been a big accelerant of that, but also these applications and services. Mobile penetration is super high. That's been a huge driver, but also just the switch to digital and e-commerce has been rapid, and any company, as they know, if on the backs of this rapid growth, then they can build a very big business very, very quickly. So there's a couple of things we look for, particularly for Latin American businesses. So firstly about defensibility, and that can exhibit itself either in understanding and navigating local regulations. So think fintech. There's particular payment rails or particular customs or particular rules that the local companies are more adept at navigating than perhaps a global US company. The other is local network effects. We talk a lot about network effects because of their defensibility, and these hyper-local marketplaces or platforms that can dominate a region, provide that scale, provide that utility, provide those network effects, becomes impenetrable from a US or global competitor. So think search or DevOps. These companies can really grow big in the US and then pretty easily expand internationally. We don't invest in those type of businesses in the region. We look for these local defensibilities in those two areas. So a couple of other things that we really look for Latin American businesses is really understanding what is best in class. And we've seen some incredible founders that have worked in early stage companies such as Rappi in the region that have really understand what best in class looks like. We've seen others that have spent some time working on studying the US, where they're seeing what kind of world-class execution looks like. So we look for that kind of understanding about what is world-class. Other things that we look for is, ideally we look for a business which is fundamentally way more attractive in that particular region than in perhaps a US equivalent. So for instance, that could be they're a particularly regulatory environment where they're able to be capture more of the economic pie in that region than the US. Could be that there's labor, there's the sort of middle-class labor pool is extremely attractive in Latin America and underserved. Could it be financial services, which are really, really poor in the region? Can you build a service which against that environment provides a much better service, a much better market opportunity than the US equivalent? When partnering with founders in Latin America, we really like to see the ability for a business to move into multiple geographies. Not only is that important because the total opportunity is bigger, but also it helps us to kind of navigate some of the currency or geopolitical risks that may exist in the region. So that ability for an idea to scale across multi-countries is important. The other is that we often see in the market that there are many industries that are massively fragmented. Take retail. It's way more fragmented in Latin America than it is in the US, for instance. That just doesn't have the kind of similar set of chains of restaurants, of kind of retail stores or 7-Elevens. It's just way more fragmented. And as an investor in marketplaces, one thing we know is that the real significant value happens in marketplaces when you are attacking this very fragmented industry. So that fragmentation is an asset, and we really like to see that fragmentation in these industries. So it feels a little bit like Latin America is where Silicon Valley was maybe 15 years ago. It's got this critical mass today, where you've got founders, you've got ideas, you've got capital, and you've got this market. And we're seeing these founders work closely and network with each other. They're sharing tips, they're sharing tactics, they're sharing ideas, and they're really helping each other to build this really interesting ecosystem, which is just this spark that's going to create this enormous set of innovation and companies, which we're really excited to back. So I've been down to Latin America many, many times to meet with founders, to understand the market, to meet the people, and there's so much energy and vibrancy and culture. So I can't wait for my next visit.